Hey everybody, welcome back. Welcome to our South African tasting, and I am joined again by Eric Mercier of Juice Imports. Say hello, Eric.
Hi guys.
Hey, how are you, man?
Doing well.
Yeah?
Yeah. Not
Excellent.
not so bad at all. How about yourself?
I'm having an amazing night. You know what? I'm getting to talk about wine. It's been the weirdest day weather-wise. It started out beautiful, and then it was going to rain. Now it looks like it's going to storm. It's super weird down here.
Yeah,
Um,
about the same here.
yeah, good old lovely southern Alberta bloody weather. Um, So I'm going to talk about South Africa with you tonight. Two of the wines here are yours, the two in the middle. The Cuvée Clint, which I'm told we're literally never going to see again, which makes me very sad.
Well, maybe. Yeah.
Maybe.
We'll see, I guess.
Okay, Devin was much more definite on no, so I guess we'll see.
Yeah, there's no
Um,
more stock of this one.
Okay.
So best case scenario, you'll get more of it a year from today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so we're going to talk about Chenin Blanc specifically here in a moment. Um, let's just jump right in and talk about South Africa kind of in general. Um, South Africa is kind of a middle ground between the New World and the Old World. When we talk about the Old World, of course, we're talking about Western Europe, but you can even say that we are, to a certain point, talking about North Africa a little tiny bit. And we are not specifically talking about North America, South America, or Australia. But South Africa kind of jumps in the middle. I think the oldest wine estates from Australia and New Zealand are kind of the 1860s. You can correct me if I'm wrong here, Eric, but I would say the oldest wine estates in the United States or North America are kind of the late 1800s, and there's maybe some late 1700s stuff for South America. But in terms of South Africa, we're looking at the 1630s, 1640s in some cases, which kind of creates them as like a separate wine region between the New and Old World with traditions of both.
Yeah, definitely. It's very interesting because they don't have any indigenous grape varieties, which was sort of one of the prerequisites for being old world, is that you had to have your own grape varieties, versus South Africa doesn't. They were all brought over. So they do fall into the new world based on that categorization. But they're definitely old world in the sense that they've been making wine there for 400 years, a lot longer than most of the new world regions, especially on the scale that they have. Wine's been made in the U.S., for example, for an extremely long period of time as well, but almost half the amount of time that we see in South
I
Africa.
think that's fair. When we talk about South Africa, I mean, the very first thing we have to talk about is Chenin Blanc, and that is the white wine in your tasting kit here. This is by Boscandal. Remember what I was saying about a lot of the wineries in South Africa going back to the 1600s. This was founded in 1685. And although it isn't one of Eric's wines, it's something that is pretty common to a lot of the wineries he represents. It's a whole agricultural estate. They have a huge orchard program, they have an absolutely massive vegetables program, they have cattle, they have chickens, they have goats. It's an absolutely massive estate, of which viticulture is a very small part. And when you talk about South Africa as a whole, you have to start with Chenin Blanc. If we go back to the 1960s and 70s, I think it was 2 out of every 3 vines in South Africa was Chenin Blanc, and South Africa had more Chenin Blanc under vine than everywhere else in the world combined at that point. Now, if we're going back to that era, this is the era of the major co-ops, the KWV era, which was not very good for winemaking. They treated grape production much like the Alberta wheat pool, where everybody pitched in the grapes to a cooperative, the cooperative set a price. Most of it, I'd say 60% of the production, maybe even 70%, was diverted off for distillation or occasionally for juice making. Most of it wasn't actually destined to become wine, and what wine there was bulk wine designed for discount bins and that, which, to be honest, I mean, in the 1970s and 1980s, that's what a lot of wine stores were. There weren't wine stores here. It was, the Alberta government, the ALCB outlet stores. So there really wasn't the infrastructure, especially here, for selling premium wine. It would be true to say that 20, 30 years ago that premium South African wine was an absolutely tiny minority compared to the big bulk producers. And Chenin Blanc has been through all of that. Now, Chenin Blanc plantings have been declining pretty steadily since, I'd say, the mid-90s. But there's still absolutely buckets of it there. And there are some that do a real specialty in Chenin Blanc. I'm thinking of Mother Rock in particular, as well as the Boscandal here. Eric, do you want to talk about Chenin a little bit before we talk about this one in particular?
Yeah, definitely. It's always interesting talking with people in South Africa about Chenin because when we think of Chenin Blanc as a grape variety, we think of the Loire Valley in France, which is where it comes from. The really interesting thing about the Loire Valley compared to South Africa is the Loire Valley is very wet and very cold, versus South Africa is very dry and very hot. And so there's no real reason why Chenin Blanc should make such spectacular wine there. And a lot of the winemakers that you talk to out there are like, it doesn't make sense here. It doesn't make sense viticulturally. It doesn't. We should have planted other grape varieties, is basically what they're saying. But we got so far along and became so famous for it that there's no turning back now. But a lot of producers now are planting other grape varieties, more Mediterranean grape varieties. So varieties that can deal with the heat and the drought. So you see like Grenache Blanc being planted a lot. You see a lot of the Spanish grape varieties.
So like the Cava blend grapes, probably at least.
Yeah, and like Albarino and Verdejo, you start seeing things like that planted a lot. Vermentino, just a lot of the grape varieties that you'd see in the Southern Rhone, as well as in Spain. And so you're starting to see a lot more of those as opposed to Chenin Blanc, which again is very much, in theory, a cold climate grape variety. So it's sort of an anomaly, but it makes delicious wines. So it's who's to argue with what it should do and shouldn't do if it makes delicious wines.
And the other thing I really like about Chenin Blanc, I think it's Jancis Robinson who actually is the one who says that, Chenin Blanc is kind of the Riesling of France. In that with Riesling, you can make it bone dry, you can make it a dessert wine, you can make it, just off dry, you can make sparkling wines with it. And you can make all of those very, very well. Chenin Blanc in France and also in South Africa, they make it as a dry wine, they make it as an inexpensive wine, they make high-end wines with it. You can oak the ever-loving hell out of it like you would with like a California Chardonnay, and it shows surprisingly well with that. Not my style of Chenin Blanc, but it does actually work. You can make sparkling wine with it, and they make some absolutely cracking sparkling Chenins in Vouvray, and by the same token, they make some amazing, honeyed, rich, gorgeous Vouvrays. It responds really well to wild yeast, and at the same time, you can get something like this that's a comfortably under $20 bottle of white wine that's a real cracker. So let's jump right into this one in particular. Let's talk about it before I drink the whole bottle here. Right off the hop, it doesn't smell like really anything else. I find Chenin, of all the grapes, perhaps after only maybe Riesling, I could probably pick out some Chenins from a mile away because they have this very particular kind of lamb's wool and smoke and apricot and kind of a really spicy pineapple characteristic to them. The nose is lifted. It's not considered an aromatic grape, but the nose is very lifted and very pretty. In the mouth, it's dry, but there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of spice. There's some really, really nice soil characteristics. And Eric, when we get to the Cuvée Clint here, I'll ask you to talk about South African terroir and South African soils specifically. I won't get too much into that with the Chenin, just to keep things going at a reasonable pace here, because I could literally talk about Chenin all night. I really like how pretty this is and what good value this is. There aren't a lot of wines in the store under $20 that I think are desperately, desperately interesting. There's plenty that are tasty, absolutely. But interesting, something I would keep coming back to the glass and learning something new, there's very, very few, and this is one of the few.
I think that's one of the things that Chenin Blanc can do really well is perform at fairly low price points in the sense that it yields quite high in places like South Africa, yet you can still get complexity out of it if you're a good enough farmer, and it can make very light, quaffable wines. That's what it's most famous for, is ending up in box wine and being sold to the supermarkets of Northern Europe, basically. And a lot of that is going to be Chenin Blanc blended with other things, but Chenin Blanc is kind of the backbone of those blends. So like you were saying that it can be on a spectrum, it can be on a spectrum qualitatively as well. It can make everything from perfectly quaffable jug wine and box wine all the way up to sort of this nice middle ground where you're getting drinkability and complexity in the same bottle, and then all the way up to those like super premium examples where you're talking hundreds of dollars a bottle. So it's nice that it can perform at every level versus, I don't think I've ever had a sub $20 bottle of Pinot Noir that I actually want to drink, versus I've had lots of sub 20 Chenin Blanc that I'm like, I enjoy this and I would happily drink this again.
I'm struggling to come up with a sub $20 bottle of Pinot that I actually have enjoyed either. That's not something you can do on the cheap.
I can't even say sub $30, frankly. Yeah, exactly. But nothing that I would ever actually drink again, I don't think. Even under $30 for Pinot Noir.
Oh no, I've got again, some very sub 30 Pinots. The Manor de Cara in particular, I think is really.
Oh yeah, that's a good example.
We have that $28.95. That's serviceable. Actually, it's better than serviceable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, in that upper 20s, you can definitely get some drinkable options. But Chenin Blanc, again, you can pay $18 and get a pretty good bottle of Chenin Blanc like that. I'd be willing to drink again.
Yeah,
for sure.
And I think that's what this is. Let's move on, and you can introduce the next one. This is the Cuvée Clint Pinotage, and congratulations for being possibly the first person to actually import a Pinotage I would willingly drink again.
Yeah, that's how I felt as well. 2 years ago, I went to South Africa for this big trade show called Cape Wines. And basically, almost every producer in South Africa shows off the entirety of their production at this event. So there was 400 plus different winemakers there. And over the course of a week, I basically, from dawn till dusk, tasted wines all day, every day at this convention center, and then at after parties and at like focus groups. So we did like an entire day on South African Chenin where we just tasted 20 South African Chenins only from Robertson, which is a sub region in South Africa. So it's like we got hyper specific. We only tasted Elgin Chardonnay one day, so just Chardonnay from this tiny appellation called Elgin. So we geeked out really hard. This was like a very intensive wine trip, a lot of learning done. And one of the things that I found was that the Pinotage was not what I had experienced in Alberta. What was being exported was very much the stereotype of these like burnt rubber and like coffee wines
we'll get
that
to
were
the coffee Pinotages and making fun of them in due time.
Yeah. And they tended to be very low in acid. They tended to be very oaky to try and mask maybe some of those characteristics. And for me, the ones that I found really beautiful were the ones that were made more like Pinot Noir, which is, again, where at least gets some of its name from. It shares a lot of similarities between Pinot Noir and then its parent grape, which is Cinsault, which was often called Hermitage in South Africa.
Well, thank you. You've completely ruined my introduction for the next wine.
I apologize. I thought that's what we're talking about.
I don't care in the slightest. But that was what I was going to talk about with Cinsault. But yeah, we'll get to Cinsault in a minute. But so we had a comment. Devin did answer this in brief. I just wondered if you had any additional comments. This being packaged in clear glass, broadly because it's not designed to age. It's designed to be drank basically as soon as we get it. Which, well done, everyone. We are sold out now. Eric is sold out now. We bought literally everything that was left in Alberta for this event. We could have sold another 2 cases of it for this. And just let me stop and say thank you all so much. I keep saying this, but I really had no idea how successful this is going to be, and it's so much bigger and so much more fun than I expected. And being able to do these chats with Eric. What do you got in your glass there, by the way, Eric?
I'm drinking beer.
Oh, well, fair enough.
Yeah, I'm drinking Burdock's Black Ruby.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't have any South African wine in the fridge tonight for some weird reason. Normally I do, but
and the Burdocks are tremendous.
Yeah, so I figured I'd go quasi-local.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
So, and low enough alcohol that I won't get loopy by the end of this tasting.
That's fair enough. And this is, fairly low alcohol. Like the Clint's at 12.5, the Force Celeste, Force Celeste at 12 flat. That's quite low, and I really appreciate that. But do you have any additional comments on the clear glass on the Clint before we move on to you explaining the rest of the Pinotage?
No, yeah, it's exactly what you said. Just it's not for long-term aging. Definitely keep it out of the sunlight. Sun damage is a real problem with wines. But yeah, it's just to show off the beautiful color and not be too serious about it.
I'm just going to get to a couple of questions here real quick here. Should the cuvee be served chilled? You absolutely could. This is something that you could serve. I wouldn't serve fridge temperature, but serving this with a light chill on it, like out on the back patio on a warm afternoon or warm evening, I'm going to say afternoon because I would totally call this an afternoon wine. This would be just fine, and then let it warm up to room temperature. Room temperature is fine as well. I actually really like it at this temperature. But if you wanted to put a light chill on this, you absolutely could.
Yeah, that's definitely how I first drank it. Was out of the like a wine fridge, like a cellar, and so it was served just slightly chilled, kind of like halfway between room temperature and fridge temperature, and it just sort of brings out again all the bright, fresh, fruity characteristics. It's fairly low tannin, so it doesn't have a ton of that mouth gripping quality, so it adapts really well to being a little bit chilled for sure.
Dean, yes, we absolutely can get more of this. I actually still have a couple bottles left, and I'll be ordering another case or 2 cases next week. So this is something we can get all the time. The Clint was quite limited. We bought literally everything Eric had left. We still have most of a case of the Force Celeste, and I think you have a little of that left, don't you?
Yeah, we got Force Celeste. We got some to go around. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit before we move on to the Senso. I want to talk about the dark plague and pestilence upon the world that is coffee pinotage. I've heard varying stories. I've heard it's a particular oak treatment. I've heard it's a slightly warmer fermentation temperature. I consider it packed with the devil. How do you go about making one of those nightmarish coffee pinotages?
There's a handful of ways. One is definitely oak chips. Oak chips are a really great way of sort of cutting corners and creating oaky characteristics in wine, but oak barrels are extremely expensive, so oak chips are basically the byproduct of making one of those really expensive barrels, and you literally put it in sort of like a trash bag sized tea bag, and you toss that in your wine, steep it, and
you make it sound
these
so sexy. Yes.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's how additives work in wine. Is that they're not really that sexy, frankly. And anyways, it leaches out a lot of those flavors, and often they're heavily toasted to impart sort of like a sweet charred flavor. And then it also acts basically the same way that a charcoal filter would. It smooths the wine. It makes it softer, but also imparts that charred characteristic, which can be interpreted as that coffee note. The other thing that happens is Pinotage is prone to oxidation because it has thinner skins. And so what can happen is when you get those oxidized characteristics, they can be reminiscent of coffee. And then the last thing is that they tend to ferment really hot and really fast. So a lot of the volatiles blow off. So all the fresh fruit vanishes really quickly in Pinotage fermentation. So you don't end up with a lot of fresh fruit characteristics in most of them, which is why this is such an anomaly, because they've combated all those things. There's no new oak on this at all. It's fermented at fairly cool temperatures in the sense that they're doing whole cluster fermentation, so they're not taking the grapes off the stems, which helps keep the fermentation a little bit colder. The alcohol is a little bit lower. It only spends a couple days on skins. All these things basically prevent it from getting too hot and turning into this sort of like stewy, soupy, coffee-laden style of wine. So
beautiful. I did have a question in the comments. Thank you, Melissa. What's the meaning? We have kind of Cuvée Clint on the front and then Clint crossed out on the back. I did ask Eric before we started if he knew the meaning of "Do you know Fletcher Hall?" Now, if you look at the wine label, you'll actually notice it doesn't mention a winery because it's actually a collaboration. It's a collaboration between Testalonga and Craven, which are 2 other South African wineries that we've been working with for a couple of years. But this is a collab. Can you talk about the collaboration between the 2 wineries, and maybe you know why you have this Clint and Clint crossed out on the label?
Yeah, for sure. So the 2 wineries, Testalonga and Craven, and hung out with them on their vineyard, and then Mick and Janine Craven are in Stellenbosch in South Africa, and basically they're best friends. It's just like 2 people who own wineries who found each other through wine. They do a million things together. They like hanging out. They have kids. They both have kids now, so their kids hang out, et cetera, et cetera. Or I guess like they're too young to actually hang out with one another, but they're getting there. Anyways, like there's just this amazing sort of 2 families, and they decided that they wanted to do something together. Pinotage is sort of like maybe a little bit the laughing stock of the of even the South African wine industry, frankly, even though that's what they're famous for. And so they're like, let's make one that's like actually good. And then Clint is kind of like it's like kind of a mean term. Like you're calling somebody like you're calling them Clint. You're being like, oh, Clint. That's about as like PG as I can. Yeah, exactly. It's about as PG as I can make this explanation. But yeah, you don't want to be a Clint. Is like kind of what it comes down to, and so that was their way of. They just wanted to like poke fun at this thing that they say all the time, and they're like, let's just call this like stupid wine that we made, because like they really do think that this wine is stupid. They're like, it's just for drinking. It's like it's not supposed to be something to be like you're not supposed to like write long tasting notes about this wine. You're not supposed to like spend hours diving into the terroir of it. They're like, no, we just made a wine that we thought tasted good. That was like a hilarious collaboration, and it was never meant to be this serious. And it's like they actually legitimately get offended when you try and take this wine too seriously. I texted Mick, like me and Mick chat quite often, and I texted him, I was like, hey, can you give me like a tech sheet on this wine so that I can know what type of soils it was grown on, what the winemaking techniques were? And he's like, a tech sheet on Clint is an oxymoron. He's like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. He's like, shut up and drink it. He's like, that's what the tech sheet will actually say if I send it to you. I was like, fine, don't tell me anything about this wine.
Cool.
Yeah.
Got another really great question. Sorry, I think we lost Eric.
No, I'm still here.
You're good? Okay.
Yep.
I lost you for a second.
I'm not losing you. I can still hear you. So hopefully everybody else can hear me.
I think you're back. I got another really great question from Melissa here. The Liquid Skin, she says alternative white wine, and the Clint says alternative red wine. Is there anything specific you should know?
Yeah, totally. So basically, so Craig Hawkins, the guy who makes this wine, who runs Testalonga, basically 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago now, I guess, in 2008, he made South Africa's first orange wine ever. At this point, the South African government actually didn't have terminology for orange wine. They had white, red, rosé. That's all they had. So they're like, this wine doesn't fall into one of those three categories, therefore you can't legally export it. And he's like, I have people in London who desperately want to buy this wine. And he's like, you're saying that I can't export this wine that they think tastes really good, that I know is made really well, because you don't have a category for it? Anyways, he was super blown away by this, but he basically conscripted a bunch of the most sort of important young winemakers of that particular time. The Molyneux family, for instance, whose wines are absolutely phenomenal. Adi Badenhorst. He got all these people together that were really legendary, and they basically like petitioned the government saying like, hey, we should be able to sell wines that we think are made well, and we demand to like basically be able to govern ourselves. And so now you can, if your wines don't get through like the initial tasting panel, they can be submitted to the alternative wine tasting panel. So if you have a wine that doesn't say alternative wine on it, it's probably like very conventional tasting. Like it tastes like, you know, whatever the tasting note in the wine Bible says for Pinotage, like coffee and chocolate and et cetera, et cetera. And if it tastes bright and fresh and juicy like this, which is maybe not what people are expecting, then you'd have to label it under this alternative wine label. That's also true of any wine that's cloudy. So if your wine's cloudy in any way, shape, or form, you have to bottle it under this labeling. I believe, at least. I'm pretty sure that's the case. Some people are into it. Some people are against it. Craig, who helped start this, is kind of against the idea of putting alternative wine. He's like, it's just wine. But at the same time, it's, you know, they're trying to be as friendly as they can to consumers, which is great. So
awesome. I think we'll wrap that up with the Clint. And Marissa, I am really sorry. Apparently I need a stronger prescription. I am... okay, that's actually very funny. You can call me Lyle all you want. That is absolutely fair enough. Let's jump straight on to the Four Celeste. This is Cinsault, which, as Eric spoilery told you, is the parent grape, along with Pinot Noir, of Pinotage. For reasons lost to history, or maybe Eric knows, I don't know, they used to call Cinsault Hermitage in South Africa for reasons, which doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. Hermitage by law has to be 100% Syrah, and even if, you know, way back in the distant past, it might have been allowed to be a blend, they sure as heck wouldn't have put Cinsault in it, because I can't imagine you'd be really able to ripen Cinsault in the far north of the Rhone Valley, because it's kind of a hot weather grape. Even Côte Rôtie, I can't imagine would actually get hot enough for Cinsault. But for whatever reason, they used to call Cinsault Hermitage down in South Africa, and when they crossed it in the 1920s with Pinot Noir, they called the resulting grape Pinotage. Pre-1960, the most planted grape, at least red grape, in South Africa was Cinsault. There was still way, way more Chenin Blanc than there was anything else even in those days, but back in the day there used to be a lot of Cinsault there. And there still is actually quite a bit. Most of it's been ripped up and replaced with more easily commercially saleable grapes like Cabernet and Shiraz and Merlot and your traditional international varieties, just because they're really easy to sell. But there's quite a bit of Cinsault left, comparatively speaking, and it responds really, really well to the South African climate. Now, after that introduction, that is one of Eric's wines, so I'll let him take over from here.
Totally. Yeah, I think Cinsault is quickly becoming sort of one of the things that South Africa is famous for. And just like Pinotage and Chenin Blanc being sort of signature grapes, I think that Cinsault going forward is going to be a signature grape of South Africa. You see the same sort of thing happening elsewhere in the world where, Sauvignon Blanc is sort of the signature grape of New Zealand, for instance, Shiraz being the signature grape of Australia. So everywhere likes to have sort of their signature grape variety, and Pinotage, although it is definitely a signature grape, not that many people really like it, frankly. So Cinsault is kind of a really good alternative for them because you don't really get a lot of Cinsault red wines elsewhere in the world. You get a lot of Cinsault Rosé, you get a lot of Cinsault blends, but not usually just like pure Cinsault. And the Cinsauts that we tasted coming out of South Africa, again, I probably tasted at least 100 of them while I was in South Africa, and they were consistently some of the best wines. There's a lot of old plantings of these vines because it wasn't commercially viable to replant them. They're in some of the most interesting sites because they were planted a long time ago as well. Very established old vines, and they're making incredibly delicious wines that are very Pinot Noir-esque. Even though it's a hot climate grape variety like you would see with Grenache, it makes wines that tend to be a little bit lower in alcohol, a little bit more delicate. They have quite thin skins as well, so you don't end up with these super black and brooding wines that you'd often see from South Africa. Definitely something more on the delicate side of the spectrum. And this is like perfectly medium-bodied, perfectly gastronomic, super crunchy, obscenely vibrant. It's just everything that I really like in wine. This is made at Mother Rock is the name of the winery. This is made by my friend Stompy, so Johan Meyer. Everybody calls him Stompy because he looks like an angry little gnome. He's got like a big beard.
Is he okay with that nickname?
Oh yeah, he's. I have almost never heard anybody ever call him Johan. Like almost nobody ever. He's definitely just known as Stompy. It's just known. Even in like write-ups online, they often won't even say his actual name, which I think is really funny. And anyway, so yeah, him and his partner have a beautiful vineyard in Swartland, which is just north of Cape Town. That's where the Pinotage is coming from as well. And this area is really famous for a handful of different soil types, mostly decomposed granite that used to be part of sort of like Table Mountain and etc. It's just been like whittled away slowly and surely. It used to be big rocks and big mountains. Now it's basically sand. So even though its origins are granite, you pick it up and it's literally like sand in your hands. But it's all just decomposed granite, and that's just an amazing soil for a bunch of different grape varieties, frankly. So
now, decomposed granite is a soil type we see quite a bit in South Africa, but it's not a desperately common soil type globally. Is that part of what contributes to kind of that typical? I used to call it the South African smoke because I was used to drinking, what we could get 10 years ago, which were South African Shirazes that were trying to be Western Australian Shirazes that themselves were trying to be Southeastern Australian Shirazes, and they picked up a very, very smoky note. What is it about the South African terroir? I was going to bring it up with the Clint until you told me it wasn't a serious wine. I shouldn't get that technical about it. Let's talk a little bit about the soil types that we see in South Africa. Let's talk about a little bit about terroir now that we have perhaps a little more serious wine that we won't get in trouble for taking seriously.
Yeah. There's a handful of different soil types. You can have things like coffee clip. Coffee clip is basically like an iron-rich mudstone that's quite famous. There's not a lot of it, but a lot of the vineyards that are planted on it are making some really spectacular wine. You see a small amount of clay depending on where you are. In certain areas, You can see small veins of limestone, but it's not super common in South Africa. And then you have a lot of sandstone. So a lot of things like that. You have some cases of alluvial sediment, but I think the big story is definitely granite. For me, granite always imparts a almost like a harsh mineral characteristic to the wines. It's almost gunpowdery, which is something that I absolutely adore about it. It can pick up this peppery quality. In white wines, it tends to, for me, almost smells like agave. Like some of those like white pepper spice notes that you would see a lot in some of the South African Chenin's. And on the red wines, it's definitely this distinctive, almost like kind of dusty gunpowder quality to them, and almost like violets. This really sort of floral element that I find sort of across the spectrum when you see anything planted on granite. For me, at least. It's a super cool soil type. And if I look at my favorite regions in the world, they're almost all planted on granite, which is pretty hilarious. Whether that be like Itata in southern Chile, whether that be Beaujolais, whether that be the Rhone Valley, it's like all these places I love just happen to have lots of granite. So maybe I just have an affinity for granite as opposed to an affinity for any particular wine.
Well, when you said agave notes, I was thinking, okay, well, yes, a bit, but when I think agave notes and wine, I think about the white wines from the Rogue Vine stuff from Itata, because to me that's just agave for days.
Totally, yeah. And I see, like, again, these sort of similarities between those wines and things like White Rhone and like Saint Péray or Saint Joseph Blanc, for instance. And then these wines, I see this common thread sort of between all those. And if you were to taste them side by side, I think there'd be a lot more similarities than differences, even across grape variety.
Can you think of any actual good explanation for why Cinsault is known as Hermitage, other than the fact it's used, pretty prevalently in the extreme south of the Rhone Valley?
As far as I know, they thought it was planted on Hermitage. Like, people were not, like, when this was first planted, they thought, oh, these are cuttings from Hermitage. That's what they thought they were getting. And then it took until there was an ampelographer, like 100 years later, to realize that this wasn't Syrah that they had planted, which they called Hermitage because it was grown on Hermitage, the hill of Hermitage in the northern Rhone. They figured out, oh crap, this is actually Cinsault. So they had been calling it Hermitage the entire time. Just like, technically speaking, Chenin Blanc in South Africa is called Steen, which means rock, because it is so rocky. It tends to give these rocky, stony qualities. And so there's sort of these different names for everything. As far as I know, that's the reason. Is they thought that they got vines from Hermitage, and they just kept propagating them and calling them Hermitage. When this was before grape varieties were really that important, nobody was looking for like Syrah in the 1800s. They were looking for Hermitage. They were looking for Saint Joseph. They were looking for Syrah, but not called Syrah. They were looking for the regions in which Syrah came from, and so they would call it the name, just like why Chardonnay in California was called Chablis as often, or White Burgundy as often as it was called Chardonnay up until the 60s, basically 60s, 70s. So same deal. They were going for Hermitage.
Beautiful. So in a second here, we'll go on to the Cab Merlot by Boscandal. I'm just going to finish this off. Now, the last two wines that we had, these are very cutting-edge wines. Eric, as you know, if you were with us last week, he imports both the Mein Klang and the Vinegar line. And what he works with is wines quite like this, wines that are very cutting edge, very brand new, lower in alcohol, natural in their making, even more natural than the Boscandal, which, if you were here for the very start of the tasting, I discussed, it's a big farm, and they do things to a point towards the agricultural holistic approach that Eric is so fond of and that he advocates for, but it's not all the way. They still use chemicals in Boscandal. But this is much more a traditional style of wine. This would be, I'm not going to call out anyone. Hi, Dad. He didn't want a Pinotage. He doesn't like Cinsault. He took the Cab Merlot because it was the style of wine that he really likes, which is to say it's a little more conventional, it's a little more traditional, it's maybe not so wild and crazy. And this is something that is going to be a continuing theme with all of these tastings. I'm going to take you weird, I'm going to take you wild on one, I'm going to try to hit two in the middle, and I am going to try to have one at least that's very, very safe. It's something that everybody's going to enjoy, just so that nobody comes at the end of this and is like, well, I'm drunk, but I hated everything. That's not the end desired result here. Oh, Faceless Hand, you're late. Bloody hell. I was waiting on you. So this is our safe. I won't say this is the worst one on the table. I won't say it's the least interesting. I won't say any of that. This is a Cab Merlot, and this is by Boscandal's Lannoy line. The Lannoy line is, so one of the original founders of Boscandal was a Huguenot, who were Protestants in France, who ended up being part of this big massacre, because for the very first time a Protestant was in line to be the King of France, and then they massacred basically all the Protestants in the country because the Catholics were really upset about that. So a lot of Huguenots fled France in the 1600s. And this particular gentleman left France and went to South Africa and set up this wine estate, back almost 400 years ago. This Lannoy line, they make a white and a red. We only get the red in this market, and they're designed to be their French-influenced wines. And, okay, I don't think I would ever mistake this for Bordeaux, but if you told me that this was a Cab Merlot from, say, the south of France, like Vin de Pédoc, I'd buy that. Alcohol's up at 14, easily the highest alcohol wine we've had tonight, and it shows. And when I say it shows, the wine, alcohol has this one weird trick. It tastes really lush and really full and very velvety and very giving, right up to the point where your tongue says, wait a second, that's alcohol. That tastes astringent and it tastes nasty, and this tastes like rubbing alcohol. I've had a lot of isopropyl on my hands for sanitation lately, and alcohol on the tongue, the second you perceive it, the emperor all of a sudden has no clothes. The illusion of lushness, of richness, it all falls away. This one actually wears 14, I think, very, very well, and as a result, if you try going back to the Clint will seem even lighter than it was at 12.5, because this has so much alcohol, it has so much fatness and richness, and this obviously has an oak influence. And when I say obviously, I get vanilla on the nose. There is probably a way that you can get vanilla compounds in a wine without using oak. Eric can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure the only way you can really do that I'm aware of is by using oak. Eric, are you familiar with a wine that can actually show vanilla character without oak?
You could probably interpret it in anything, but the vanilla that you're smelling in that is actual vanillin. Oak barrels, one of the compounds in the actual wood itself is vanillin, and a handful of other compounds that they use to make artificial vanilla extract and stuff like that. So you really are smelling vanilla when you have an oaked wine. You're not perceiving vanilla. You're actually smelling the real thing that makes vanilla smell like vanilla. Grapes on their own are incapable of making those compounds. So that doesn't mean that you couldn't interpret a different smell as vanilla in a white wine that doesn't see any oak. But the only way to get actual sort of vanilla flavors is oak barrel, or if you're a very inexpensive wine, something that's sort of $15 and less, you could use artificial oak essence, which is an artificial oak compound that you would add to things like Yellowtail, for instance. That's why their wines say oaked, not barrel aged or aged in oak barrel or whatever. It's because they're adding a flavoring compound that tastes like oak, because it's a lot less expensive. You're talking about a penny or less per bottle to make oak flavors, versus a brand new oak barrel. You're only getting 25 cases out of that oak barrel. It maybe costs you $2,500. So that, once it reaches the consumer, is dozens of dollars on a new oak barrel. So in order to make a wine that costs $15 but tastes oaky, you would have to cut corners by using artificial oak essence. So
and there's other ways. There's oak spirals or oak chips, which are just old oak barrels that have been basically put through a giant industrial wood chipper.
Yeah.
You have, and again, like when Eric says a brand new oak barrel is $2,500, you don't just get one use out of that and throw it away. Unless you're the bourbon industry. Everybody else, they'll put it 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, or in some cases, not going to name names, Robert Mondavi, 10 uses on a barrel. It's something where, a $2,500 upfront cost might be for your brand new top of the line $70 super oaky Chardonnay, and then you'll quietly step that down or use a blend of brand new and used oak to get the effect. I know a lot of wineries that won't use new oak. They'll buy second or third or fourth used because they only want that more subtle oak touch. They don't want that brand new character just because it's so intense.
Mm-hmm. That's the great thing about, speaking of South African wines, but the Wolf Trap, that entry-level white wine that's sub $20, they actually use that white wine to season their new barrels. So they put that really inexpensive white wine into like the most expensive white barrels that money can buy, because they actually don't want that much oak characteristic in their like really expensive red wines. They want a little bit less oak characteristics. So they'll put that white wine into that barrel for a month to 3 months to just leach out a little bit of the flavor, to soften those barrels, almost like seasoning the barrels, and then they'll put the red wine into it. So that's a really good way of secretly getting like a pretty darn delicious white wine for sub $20. Again, I'm sure it's made by a massive corporation. I'm sure the farming and ethics are not great, but if you're just on the hunt for a cheap like $15 bottle of wine that has real oak, that's definitely the one. So good insider tip.
Yep, and I think this is actually seeing, at the very least, spirals. I would be surprised if this wasn't seeing at least some barrel aging as well. This is $17.95, so that's at the low end for real barrel aging. But
in South Africa, though, again, because the rand is so devalued and land is comparatively so cheap, and labor is definitely super cheap. A lot of it's very illegal, so it's you can get wines for like $18 for sure, that are in new barrels.
Okay, I think we're going to call that the end of the formal tasting. We'll open it up for questions and answers. You can go ahead and do that right in the text. If you're looking for an answer from Eric specifically, just make the first word of the question Eric, and we'll get straight into that. Let's see what we got here. So many people love the hand. Don't know where the hand's gone. He's disappeared. He is deeply mysterious. I had some people who weren't sure about wine tasting number 4. Well, you know what? We're going to try a lot of different things. We're doing South Africa now. We're doing, the weird thing is that the Austro-Hungarian tasting has been our most successful ever. That was the one where everybody seemed to love everything. We're going to have weeks where we have hits and misses. I'm actually really stoked, especially on the Clint. That probably is not going to be wine in that left at the end of the night. Oh, hey, it's the hand. All right. But... no, I think that we're going to have hits and misses as we go across a huge range of flavors. We're going to Spain next, and then we're going to do what I really hope is a warm Friday night. We're going to have a white and rosé tasting. And then I actually wanted to put a question and answer period here to you. So this week was South Africa. Next week is Spain. The week after is Germany. What do you want for the week after? I'm putting it out to the audience, and we will see what we can get for answers. And you know what? If we get a whole bunch of people who are just piling behind one country, we will do that country. And yes, Corey, I have been feeding you weird wines for years, and you're better for it. And thank you, Chris. Yeah, I also like the weird, wild, and delicious. But hey, you know what? If you get through this entire series that we do, however long COVID goes and beyond, and you don't hate anything, I'm doing my job wrong. I need to be pushing the envelope at least with one wine a week, just so that I take you out of your comfort zone. If I just do things that's super safe and super accessible for everybody, well, we're all going to get very bored very quickly. I want to be pushing the envelope and making changes. Back again already? All right, buddy, held hand. Simmer down.
I always tell people that tasting different wines is sort of the equivalent of trying new foods for the first time. That at first you may not like it, but then eventually you'll crave those flavors. Again, I always liken it back to the fact that the first time I had coffee, blue cheese, olives, sushi, caviar, I hated every single one of those things the first time I had them, ended up loving them. It's the exact same way with wine too. First time I had wine was was accidentally out of a water bottle. One of my parents doing the responsible thing, smuggling in wine into a music festival when I was a child, and I thought that it was the water bottle. It was actually the wine water bottle, and I got my first swig of wine. I was not a fan then, and that put me off wine for at least the next 15 years of my life. And then eventually it ended up being something that I could dedicate my life to. So it's you never know what you're going to end up loving at the end of it. So maybe be patient with the freaky wine styles, and you'll end up enjoying them.
Well, speaking of people who love things, apparently we had a lot of fans for your shirt last week. A lot of people not as impressed with your current shirt.
Want me to go change? Should I go switch into a different shirt?
That's strictly necessary, but come on, Eric, up your game.
Come on, I thought this one was good. You guys are not into this? I feel like this is great.
We've got a vote for Portugal. We've got a vote for Canada. Vote for French rosé. Italian. We just did Italian 3 weeks ago. We can't really go back to Italy that quickly. Although twist my rubber arm. Everybody always tells me to just shut up about Italy. I'm just a hopeless Italian fanboy. Orange wines, Chile. Actually, Eric, Chile, what have you got landing right away? Do you have anything really cool from Rogue Vines or anything coming in the next little bit?
I don't import those. Those are not me.
All right. Well, fine.
Yeah.
Be like that.
So I can't help you, Chile.
Blind tasting. Ooh. We just picked some things. That could be interesting. We actually have done blind tastings before. I'll have to find the time and a whole bunch of brown paper bags to actually blind a whole bunch of bottles and buy a whole bunch of electrical tape to wrap the necks. We could do blind.
That'd be fun. That'd be super fun.
I don't really want to be the person, like right now we're selling like 5 cases a week times 4 wines, that's 240 bottles. I'll be honest, I don't personally want to sit down and hand bag and blind 240 bottles of wine. I really don't, but that would be a lot of fun actually. Another vote for Canada, a vote for New Zealand. Ooh, vote for the Czech. That could be interesting. Chile again, Okanagan again, more Canada. France.
People want to do Canada. We got to do Canada.
We could
Sounds
do
like
Canada.
Canada's winning.
What do you have that's really interesting from Canada right now, Eric?
Oh, I have so much stuff from Canada.
Okay, what do you have
Got it.
Canada that we can do for 4 bottles for $80?
I have nothing from Canada we
Cool.
can do for
That's kind of what I thought.
Yeah.
Canadian one is tough to do on a budget.
Yes.
But you know what? If we really had a ton of demand for Canada, we could do a 3-bottle tasting. And I just lost my earbud. Okay, I got you again, Eric. We could absolutely do something with Canada. There are some really interesting things. Lake Breeze has a brand new Roussanne that's quite good. We've got quite a few really neat things that I know you're bringing in, so that could be fun. What do you recommend there, Eric?
Like a Sunday in August. Cab Merlot is super tasty right now.
Have you got some stock of that?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Yep.
I'll bring that back because I've actually got a hole in Canada right now. I'll
Nice.
reorder that.
Yeah, and it's super well priced considering it's organic, it's from Canada. It ends up being cheaper than most things that are not farmed organically and made with a bunch of additives. So it's actually pretty good value in my opinion. Plus the packaging's beautiful, and Michael Schindler, the guy who makes it, is one of my favorite people in the entire world. I just actually sent him a case of wine. He lives in Vancouver but makes wine in the Okanagan, so he literally just rents a house for a lot of months of the year in the Okanagan to make wine and be crazy like that. But yeah, he's the best dude. So we got that. They're brand new wines from Else, which is my friend Kelsey. She's doing amazing things as well. We got her new Pet Nat in. We got her skin fermented Muscat, which is really good, and a new Cab Franc from her that is just like juicy, wild insanity. So that's great. Lightning Rock Chardonnay is in stock currently, and it's crazy as well. It's just the perfect bottle of Chardonnay, in my opinion. I don't know. We got lots of really great things on the go from Canada at the moment.
I see everyone here hates me and wants me to do the blind tasting. I'm already working 7 days a week, folks. Come on. Don't make me hand wrap 240 bottles.
Do
right?
it. Do it.
I hate you, Eric. All right. The other options that were very popular, because we're going to leave that one behind for the minute. Portugal, Canada so far, and some Chile. Becky volunteers her husband to bag the blind bags. Well, I will not take... Actually, you know what? That could be fun. if we actually dropped off the bags and wine to maybe 4 or 5 different households, and then those folks bagged
Have them
them,
do the work.
and then if everybody was really careful with masks and gloves, and then we repacked everything, it'd take a couple weeks to set up, but that could be fun. I couldn't do it like right away, but
You
Eric,
have 3 weeks.
you and I will talk off camera. We'll see what we can set up, and we'll see if we can set like a super surprising 4-bottle tasting that's like,
I like it.
I don't think you know what's going to be in this bag. I absolutely
like
love that. Give Eric and I a bit of time, and we will set that up. Wow, I just signed myself up for so much extra work, but I actually love the idea enough. I
It'll
don't
be
mind.
fine.
I think Canada could be fun. Oops, I just lost the web browser. There we go. You were in Croatia last year, and they're doing some decent wines. Now, that's actually something I've been meaning to ask Eric about, because you've got stuff from Austria and Hungary and the Czech Republic and Slovenia. What about Croatia? I mean, it's right in there.
I actually haven't been to Croatia. I didn't go to Croatia, sadly. But yeah, I also hear that they're doing amazing things, but I have not tasted very much of it. I've only tasted 2 or 3 producers, and they were all pretty good, but not amazing. But I trust that there are amazing things out there. I just haven't gotten my hands on them yet, so I need to do a little more research, a little more travel. Unfortunately, only one of those things is an option at the moment, so
Yes.
research it is.
Flights are so cheap.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, at some point, Croatia would be really interesting. Same thing with Slovenia. I think that's really underserviced in Alberta at the moment. There were some cool things, and then they all sort of vanished. So I think that those 2 countries are definitely, they need some love here in Alberta, because they make some amazing wines and deserve to have their wines over here. Same thing with Georgia. Like that's a huge one on our list, is getting some Georgian wines in here, but it's challenging. There's a pretty hefty language barrier, a cultural barrier, an internet barrier. There's a shipping barrier because the wines would be extremely expensive to ship out of Georgia. But I just think that it's like such a compelling country, and the wines are absolutely stunning. So it's, there's lots of countries that deserve to have their wines in Alberta that aren't here yet. So we'll have to be patient, I guess.
We are seeing a ton of love for volunteers for helping with blind bagging. So yeah, Eric, you and I will talk after this, probably tomorrow, and we'll pick a you'll never guess what's behind the bag sort of wine tasting. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. I think that'll be great. So next week, I think we'll narrow this down to we can do not next week, 3 weeks from now. But we can either do let's say a 4 wine tasting from Portugal, because there's actually a lot from Portugal that we could do right now, or we could do a 3 wine from Canada. Let's see some stuff in the comments here. So yeah, let's narrow it down. Blind tasting is coming, but it's going to take some work. That is happening. Let's narrow it down: 4 wines from Portugal or 3 wines from Canada. Let me know. I want to so you've probably seen me kind of munching away here, just slightly. Actually, Eric's completely obscuring it at the moment. But I actually, thanks to the kindness of Patricia at Umami Shop, she actually kicked in a free charcuterie tray for me, and it's absolutely spectacular. I've got far, far, far more cheese than even I could eat. A couple of different types of pickles, which I haven't been eating because I was trying to talk on camera. But it's not stopping me now. We've got an absolute pile of gooseberries. We got a couple of bunches of grapes. We got some sweet candy treats. We've got a huge amount of dry cured meats. We got some crackers. We got some really, really interesting things. Thank you, Faceless Hand. But we have some really, really neat stuff here. So I believe Aaron is going to have some pics and some video of the charcuterie tray, because I know we kind of talked about it last week and said, hey, we're doing this thing, but we don't have any pictures to show you yet. Well, we're going to have all the pictures of literally what we already have here for you folks with the charcuterie tray. I'm a person known for his appetite, and I could in absolutely no universe finish this myself, which is exactly the type of charcuterie tray I like. And the pickled foods in particular are really, really good, and I love pickled everything. My wife is constantly mad at me the amount of different types of pickles that I buy next door at the Wooden Shoe and always have in the fridge, taking up half the shelves of my 6 types of pickles. And this is delicious. Got to vote for Portugal, got to vote for Canada, got to vote for Portugal. Well, that's 50-50. We can't see it. No, Aaron is working on a camera down shot of the charcuterie tray here in a minute. Oh, hello, hand. A white or red? That seems like a point at white. Thank you, hand. Close up on the tasting board is coming. We're working on that. You can't see him, but Aaron is an absolute star working in the background, getting all of this set up. He is the person who turns our, retail tasting space into a full-on studio and sets up the video conferencing with Eric and takes care of all the lighting and. So yes, we are moving the charcuterie board in front of the camera here just in a moment. So give us a second. We are working on that. And we already have it. Okay, we'll open it up to 3 suggestions. We have some very angry people who want Argentina, and fair enough. We had some votes for Argentina, so we will now open it up to the 3-way race. Argentina for 4, Portugal for 4, or Canada for 3. Just because Canada we kind of have to do with 3 just because it only got really planted in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Land prices here are insane because everybody wants to build their McMansion on the same land that they would normally grow grapes on. It's been interesting with Canadian wine. It's a lot more expensive than other countries just because of labor rates and land rates and a lot of things, and just the newness of the region. If you go to France, you go to Italy, and you see these terraces cut in the hillside. Those were cut 500, 600 years ago. Here they were cut 10 years ago, and they're still paying for the loan for that cutting in of terraces. So Canada's kind of tricky that way. Also, I don't know if you know, but my video feed is on about a 30-second delay, so I'm seeing what you're seeing about half a minute after you. Comments are live, though.
I don't get to see anything, so I haven't actually seen all your antics, which is very sad. I'm just looking at a video of myself.
No, it's like a real-time lapse of me going progressively more bald. It's going to be quite the video diary of that.
Fantastic. I'll have to catch the replay or something.
Good. What else we got here? Steve's in for the charcuterie tray. More star wipes on the video feed. Aaron, I'm sure you can accommodate star wipes. Yes, we can. Absolutely. I agree we need more star wipes, and we need a theme song.
Yes.
So we're going to have some of that. More votes for Argentina. Ooh, this is going to be a 3-way race. Aaron, could you do us like a poll jigger on the Facebook page between Canada, Argentina, and Portugal? He just made a very sad noise. So, yes, he can, but he's going to hate doing it.
Let me see.
It shouldn't be that hard.
I'm not going to say
don't
it
have to
shouldn't
do
be
it,
that hard. That's
so.
mean to Aaron. It's probably much more difficult, and I don't have to do it, so I'm not going to assume it's easy.
Cool. Well, I think I've done all that I can do.
I think you have as well. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah. So I'm going to sign off
huge
now.
Thanks. Thank you.
But yeah, thank you guys all so much for listening again. If you have any more questions, again, there's lots of ways of reaching me. You can reach me at Eric, ERIK, at juiceimports.com via email if you feel like it. Or you can reach out to us on Instagram, which is at juiceimports. Not the most complicated name of all time, just at juiceimports. So definitely, I don't know, come comment, share the tasting with us. We appreciate that. We also have a wine club as well that we run through Andrew Hilton, which is 3 bottles of wine every month. We do a podcast, which is kind of similar to this, but with less of me flailing. All you get to do is hear my voice instead of actually see me flailing. But yeah, there's some pretty darn good wines in that club. So definitely sign up if you get a chance.
Awesome. Eric, I'm going to ask you one last question before you go.
Yeah.
What do you have landing in the next little while? We usually bring in all your new stuff as it arrives, sometimes all of it, just to be annoying. What do you have coming in the next little bit that we should all be excited about? Specifically, maybe whites and rosés, because it's getting to be patio season.
Totally. So exciting things that we're getting in. We just had 3 things land at the warehouse this week that you guys will be getting over the next 2 weeks. So one is the brand new vintage of Craven. This year as well, they released their first vintage ever of Chardonnay. We only got 60 bottles for all of Alberta, but I'm super, super excited about it. We also got the new vintage of Pinot Gris from them. That's apparently like the best vintage yet.
Yeah, I love that Pinot Gris. How much did you get?
Yeah, we got a lot. We got
Okay,
like 46 packs.
Okay,
So
good. Good.
The fortunate thing about texting Mick all the time is that he gives us a disproportionate allocation. We get more of it than we should get, which is great. So we got that, as well as their other wines. Their Cinsault is back in stock now. Their Syrah just came back after an entire year of being out of stock because it sold so quickly last time. So yeah, those things are all really exciting. Silwervis just came back in stock.
Oh, the Smiley Red.
Yeah, so we have brand new vintage of Smiley Red that just showed up, as well as Smiley White, which is the craziest wine on planet Earth.
What the heck's in Smiley White? What are the varietals for that?
So Smiley White is 100% Chenin Blanc, but it's a 6 vintage blend, and it is 1/4 orange wine, 1/4 Maderized. So they actually leave barrels out in the sun to let them like basically cook. 1/4 aged under floor, so under an actual layer of yeast, the same way that you would make like Manzanilla style sherry, for instance, or Vin Jaune in the Jura. So 1/4 is like that, and then the other quarter is direct pressed into old puncheon barrels, and then they blend those together. But it's multi-vintage, so it's like.
That sounds like they tried like Candeli Verano and said, "Hold my beer." Like,
oh yeah,
it's just madness. This sounds incredible.
Yeah,
How
it's
much did you
insanely
get?
complex. We got 25 cases, so we actually got quite a bit of it.
Nice.
It is like completely mind-bending, as well as we got their new vintage of all their high-end wines, which is really cool. Terracura, I think, is like basically the best made Syrah and Chenin Blanc in the country. And then as well as we got in their like high-end Cinsault, which is just, again, phenomenal. So we got those in, as well as the new vintage of Intellego. So 3 new South African producers, so we can continue the South African train for a while, but we got in the brand new vintage of Chenin, new vintage of Syrah, and the new vintage of Kadungu.
Ooh, yeah, Devin absolutely loves that.
Yeah, and this vintage.
I've given plenty of this to the hand. He's had more than his due, although he's once again thirsty.
And then the last thing that I think you guys are going to be like over the moon excited about is that we actually recently signed Valentina Pasalacqua, who is like, again, sort of becoming this like legend of southern Italy, the same way that you see with Arianna Occhipinti or Elisabetta Foradori being like these sort of like larger than life producers in Italy, and so she is in Puglia, so we're getting in things like Nero di Troia from her, we're getting in things like Falanghina, we're getting in things like Orange Wine Petnat, we're getting in Primitivo, we're getting in Negro Amaro, so great varieties that are super cool for us, and we've never had an Italian wine in the portfolio before, and she's absolutely cult, super legend. So we're very excited about those, and those will be here in a month. So that's also coming in, and then new wines from Dirty and Rowdy also coming in.
Cool. Yeah, I love the Dirty and Rowdy wines.
Yeah, we got some crazy limited edition stuff, including a small allocation of GSM. Which is or MSG, sorry, it's the MSG, which is the right order for those letters, I think. So it has them dressed up as like members of KISS on the front of it.
Okay,
so
that does sound really fun.
Oh yeah, it is hilarious and awesome. So definitely look forward to all those things because it's just too much good wine.
Cool, thanks, Eric. We will talk very soon, and we will set up the blind tasting. And we will get that done. To all of you who volunteered to help set up the blind tasting, I will be in touch, and we will get that set up. Eric, as always, absolute pleasure having you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, he's just amazing. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
I'll hang out for a bit longer, and we'll take some more questions. What else we got here? People saw the hand. Lovely. Aaron, how are we for polls? Is that a thing that's easy to do, or is this going to be very tricky?
Nigel and I tried, and I don't know. You know.
Okay, apparently the poll is going to be more complicated than I initially let on. So we might throw that up on Twitter, just because Twitter polls are really, really easy to make. And Instagram as well. So I'll tell you what, we will set up the poll on our Twitter page and our Instagram page, and we will do it from there. And the 3 categories will be 3 Canadian wines, 4 Portuguese versus 4 Argentina. We are really trying to stick to this $80 price point because consistency is great. If we have something that's absolutely stunning, we might just jump up to $85 for the blind tasting thing, just because we want to show you some stunning things. But we're really trying to hit that $80 price point, which sometimes isn't that easy. But yeah, we'll throw that up on Twitter, we'll throw that up on Instagram, because apparently Facebook is not set up for polls. But we will do that, and we will have that up live literally as soon as I'm off camera. I also have damn near drained my Clint. What else we got here? Who's the hand? Well, the hand is the faceless hand. Wait, he is anonymous. Yep. Am I going to introduce next week's? Yes, I did that at the start, but let's do this again. Thank you, Jenna. You're actually better at this than I am. Yes, next week... we are going to have another guest speaker. We are going to have Andrew Stewart from Vino al Vino, and he will be pouring I think our first actual winery profile tasting. So we're going to do all wines from the same winery for the first time ever. We may get back to this, we may not. But these are from Pago Casa Gran Benicel, pardon me, Pago Casa Gran Benicel. And these guys are from Valencia, which is a really, really hot part of Italy. And when you talk about Italy, bloody hell, all from the same part of Spain, you can tell it's the end of the night. So Spain's really, really interesting. You've got the premium regions. You've got Priorat, you've got Rioja, you've got Navarra, you've got Castilla y León, and then you've got kind of your central plateau regions like La Mancha, and you've got Valencia. They're very, very hot, and traditionally they're not really, really high-end regions. But within those, they have a separate system that says, okay, these aren't like the premium wine regions of Spain, but there are some really exceptional wineries within those. And those wineries get the designation, and it's a legal designation, of Pago. So these are all Pago wines. So these very, very, very hot weather grapes. They use Garnacha and they use Monastrella. The white is a blend of Gewurz and Muscat to really ramp up those delicate aromatics. So we're going to have 4 really interesting central Spanish hot weather wines that don't drink quite as heavy as you think they're going to. I mean, this cat's 14.5. It's a big wine, but they're not as clumsy and heavy on their feet as you might think. They're actually very light and delicate wines. And we will have Andrew Stewart of Vino al Vino joining us for that. So that'll be a lot of fun.
The farm families across Western Canada working through these.
Let's see if there's anything else we got here that we need to cut
challenges that face the generations of farmers who came before.
How many pieces of cheese can I fit in my mouth at one time? That will be a greater mystery than the hand's identity.
We're all in this together.
And I think that's it. I think we're done. Thank you, everybody. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'll stick around in the chat a little longer, but we're going to wrap up the video here. Thank you all so much for joining me. We will see you next week for Spain, in 2 weeks for Germany, and in 3 weeks for the tasting as determined by the poll. And we will have a blind tasting either the week after that or one more week out. It just depends how long it takes for us to set that up. As always, I've been Kyle with Andrew Hilton. Thank you all so much for joining me. Thank you so much. Goodbye.